Hello and welcome. So, if you aren't aware, the 2024 Candidates Chess Tournament is taking place from the 4th of April to the 22nd, I believe, and it's happening right now in Toronto, Canada. So, today is the 14th of April when this video was recorded, and they're playing the ninth round today. So this game here is from the previous eighth round. At this moment, there are two people in first place with 5 points out of 8 games played. And those are, I believe, Pomniachi and maybe getting this wrong, Gukesh. But anyway, you can look all this up online. But I have a game for you today between Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana that was just recently played. An interesting battle between these two, who are ranked number 2 and number 3 in the world right now. And they are the top 2 seeds in the candidates tournament. Right now, I believe Nakamura has 4.5 points, so he's in second so far, so he still has a chance. And Caruana is down a little bit further, but there are still, 6 more rounds to go, and anything can happen. All right, let's check this game out. So Hikaru played at 96.3% accuracy versus 89.2 for Caruana. Let's see. Hikaru had 2 great moves versus 1 for Fabiano. And 5 inaccuracies versus 6. And no mistakes by Hikaru, 1 mistake by Caruana, and 1 blunder. So let's see what happened here. And before we go on, also just a game description here. Hikaru played at 2850, Caruana at 2700. So in the opening, they both played with 96% opening accuracy, but Caruana didn't play quite as good in the middle game. So Hikaru played at 96.5% in the middle game and 85.4% for Caruana. Okay, enough talking with that lengthy intro. So turn on the analysis. The game began with Hikaru playing e4, and then we have e5, knight to f3 attacking the pawn. Knight to c6, and bishop to b5, the Rui Lopez opening. So, of course, putting pressure on this knight, which is guarding this pawn, which is being attacked by the knight on f3. So here we have a6, forcing the bishop to make a decision of either capturing or retreating. For those beginners out there, if you're watching this video and you think, well, what if they just capture the knight and then you can pick this pawn off? Well, if you capture the knight, the D pawn can recapture. Then if the pawn is captured here on e5, the queen can just move up the board, attacking the pawn and the knight and recover the pawn. So in the game, the retreat is played by Nakamura, but it keeps a little bit of pressure on this knight. So now developing moves are played. The pawn is under attack. Nakamura plays a safe move here, just protecting the pawn. And now we have bishop to c5, developing the bishop, getting ready to castle, aiming at this f pawn. So Nakamura castles. And now the pawn is protected by rook and king, in case the knight decides to jump up here and try and put pressure on this. All right, so d6 is played, which allows the bishop room to develop here. And the game continues with c3. So we're still in common book moves in the Ruy Lopez, which can be a very complicated opening that sometimes goes 20 moves or more deep into book moves and opening theory. So it's pretty crazy. So beginners could try out the Ruy Lopez, but there's a lot to learn in this opening. So c3 is a common move that's played. That way you could push this d pawn in the future, and the c pawn backs it up. You also leave a little escape route for your bishop in case it has to retreat. So the game continues with castling, and then rook to e1. So now the computer actually likes this h3 move, which prevents the bishop from pinning this knight to the queen. So here we have a retreat by this knight, which can reposition over here to the king side. So white does the same, and this is a common maneuver in the Ruy Lopez, bringing the knight from b to d2, and then over to f1. And from f1, this knight can either jump up to g3 or even up to e3 here, depending on what the position calls for. So knight to g6 is played, repositioning this knight, where from here it can jump up to f4 here, getting closer to white's king side. All right, so the continuation of this move, just jumping the knight over to f1 where it can reposition. The computer still wants this h3 move to prevent the bishop from pinning this knight, so, or to keep the other knight from moving forward. So counterplay in the middle here. Finally, d5 is played, and a lot of times in the e4, e5 openings, when d5 can be played by black, that kind of frees his game up a little bit and gets him a little bit closer to equalizing the game. But let's see what happens. So we have a capture here. Now, the only thing about this capture, so after, a recapture, now we have more space for black in the center here. So black has this e5 pawn versus white's d pawn, which is back here on d3. So this does give black a little bit more breathing room for his pieces. So the game continues with bishop to b3. The computer says that's an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to just go ahead and snatch this pawn up. So we could take a look at that. Why wasn't this pawn captured? So after capture, we have capture, and then the recommendation is, oh, now it's saying not to capture there. All right. And here, d4 is the best move, forking these two pieces. So why would you not want to capture here? It looks like it would be better to capture here, king captures, then you capture here, and the rook cannot capture, or this queen comes down here, forking the king and the rook. So that's an interesting little series of tactical maneuvers there. In this position, it would be best to just move this king back here to g1, and the game kind of remains pretty equal here. White has a slight edge. All right, back to the game. We have bishop to b3 lining up on this knight, although the computer wanted us to capture in the middle here. But now c6 is played, and the computer does not like that. It prefers just pinning this knight to the queen. So now we have, finally, the d pawn pushing forward here, backed up by the c pawn, attacking the bishop. But the computer doesn't like that. It wants a push of the h pawn up the board. So I don't know, what is the computer thinking with that move? I guess you're... Huh. Alright, well that's interesting because it looks like you could just capture here, but then white could capture this central pawn. So it looks like knight at d to f4 would be recommended, or bishop to g4. Once again, pinning this knight to the queen. But you could move this knight over here to h2 to back this other knight up. So interesting possibilities here. Okay, well, in the game we had d4. So the response was to capture. Knight captures. This knight retreats back. And now finally we have this h3 move, preventing the bishop or the knight from jumping down here into white's kingside. The computer actually wants this bishop to e3 move to help fortify this knight, because now we have a capture and then a pawn capture, and white is left with an isolated pawn. The computer wanted to capture with the queen, but if the queens were traded and then this isolated pawn is left here, white does have the advantage of the bishop pair, but the more pieces that are traded off, the harder it is to defend an isolated pawn. So now we have knight to d5. The first step is to blockade the isolated pawn. So it's easier to attack an isolated pawn if it's not a moving target. So a moving target is harder to attack. So first you want to blockade the isolated pawn, preventing this isolated pawn from being able to move. And now bishop to c2 is played, which repositions, aims at the king side, and now bishop to e3, just developing the bishop, helping protect this knight, and kind of blocking the scope of this rook on the e-file. Alright, so the game continues with knight to g3, so getting this knight off the back rank, jumping up here where it can reposition maybe into the center and possibly jump up here, attacking the bishop or eyeing the king side pawns. So the game continues with the knight jumping forward here. Computer wanted to give up the bishop pair and capture here, but like I said, you want to kind of be cautious about trading off material when you have an isolated pawn. As more and more material gets traded off, it's harder to defend that pawn. So knight to d5 is played, just retreating back after the rook and the bishop pile up on that knight. So now we have a3. Why was this move played? Well, it looks like to keep the knight from jumping over here and harassing the bishop, possibly. Could be a waiting move, although the computer preferred this move. Bishop to d2 to keep an eye on the squares where this knight could jump to. Alright, so the rook develops to e8. Computer says that's an inaccuracy. It would have been better to jump the queen up here and create a queen-bishop battery aimed at white's king side. So finally, this bishop is moved up here, but now the computer wants the queen to jump here and create a dangerous bishop and queen battery lined up, threatening this pawn. Although for the moment the knight is blocking that, but still, if the piece is cleared out of the way, there could be a threat there. So knight to f6, attacking the rook. The rook does not move because we have a pin of the knight to the queen here. So h6 is played. The bishop attacks, captures the knight because the knight, if that bishop would have retreated, of course, the rook would come under fire. Especially if the bishop retreated and then it was attacked again, this knight Black's knight would have captured that rook. So queen captures, and now the game continues with queen to d2. So getting the queen off the back rank, allowing this queenside rook to enter the game. And now we have queen to g5 here. So a confrontation between the queens. Perhaps Caruana, wanted a queen trade, which would leave him with double G pawns. But, like I said, with an isolated pawn, the more material that's traded off, the easier it is to target this pawn. So, let's see here. Computer recommends queen to c3, but we have this interesting move. The rook drops back and kind of just gets in between the queens here. Although the rook is kind of stuck here because if it moves, the queen can be picked off. So interesting choice by Nakamura. Okay, so now what is the game looking like here? It looks like it's even according to the computer. Now we have this knight move jumping forward, but that tips the game slightly in white's favor. Caruana is trying to build up some type of attack here. All right. Computer recommends doubling the rooks, but instead we have this interesting move here attacking the queen. So here queen to d5 is played. Now why wouldn't you want to snatch up this pawn? So let's take a look at that. If the pawn is captured, well then you'd have rook to e4, pinning the knight to the queen. And we have the queen and the rook both attacking that knight. So now, looks like g5 would have to be played to save the knight. But now rook at a to e1, just doubling up here. And then, let's see, rook at a to d8, lining up on the queen. Although now it's saying rook to f8 is better. But let's see here. If that were played, bishop to d1 or knight to f5 is the recommendation. So if this line would have played out, then white would have the edge. So, this is why that pawn was not captured. So after h4, instead, the queen centralizes and threatens a mate in one here. So possible mate in one. Nakamura responds by blocking with his rook and attacking the knight here. So the knight retreats, although interesting choice here. The recommendation is to just go ahead and capture that. So now it looks like queen to c3 is recommended by the computer. Now you wouldn't want to capture this knight because then the rook would be pinned. The rook would be pinned here to the king if the king captured on g2, and then this pawn could threaten to come down here and attack the pinned rook. So dangerous stuff here, these tactics. All right, so recommended is this move, and then bishop to h3, and the whole time white is still in the lead here. So now attacking both pieces, knight to f4. The recommendation is not to capture the knight here, of course, because then you'd have a mate with queen to g2. So rook to g1 to cover that. And now queen up to d6, protecting the knight. Rook takes f4. Queen captures. And then the king can jump up here and capture. So then we'd have queen captures here. So yeah, the game could have taken a crazy twist here, but I guess Caruana didn't want to go into all that craziness, and white would be slightly ahead here anyway. So what's the recommendation? Queen to e3 and bishop to b3, threatening a fork here. So now could trade queens off, but it looks like giving up this pawn is recommended. Okay, back to the game. So in the game, if we go back a little bit here, we don't want to capture that pawn and go into a bunch of crazy variations. Here, threatening mate in 1, we block the mate. Computer recommends capturing, which would go into some crazy lines as well. And so Caruana was trying to avoid that because, between the two, I would imagine Nakamura is a more tactical player. But, when they're the second and third best players in the world, you have to be good all around. Tactics, strategy, positional play, end games, openings, everything. So the game continues with doubling of the rooks. Now this knight retreats back here to help, defend the bishop. Let's see how this continues here. The computer says that's an inaccuracy. It would have been better to just centralize the other rook. And then now we have rook to e5 attacking the queen. So queen up to d8, although queen to d7 is recommended. h5, gaining space on the king side. And now bishop to d7 is played, a mistake. And that jumps the game up even further in white's favor. So what would have been best here? It looks like moving the knight up and attacking the rook here. So if that is played, the recommendation now is to ignore this, to just threaten an attack on the king. And then, if the rook is captured, what do we have here? Queen checks. King would have to run to here. How do you follow up? I mean, we could take a look at that. So, if you have this, queen to h7, white keeps the lead here. King is forced to f8. Now you can go ahead and capture. And let's see. Here it gets tricky. Queen to f6 is recommended. What happens if you pick off this pawn here and go after the rook? Does that do anything? Queen to f6 helps guard everything here. Then what do? Bishop up to f5. Man, okay. Well, first let's take a look at this. If you go here, then it's a mate in 3. So, how would that play out? Here, you're threatening checkmate by capturing with the queen. So, oh man, yeah, it doesn't look good here. If you capture the knight, then the queen can mate up here. So queen to d1 check. You just lose your queen. Queen captures the f2 pawn. You lose your queen. You just play some other random move. Then the queen captures here with mate. So if we go back, and seeing that that's a blunder, what happens if queen to f6 is played? Well, then you have let's take a look. Knight to e4, attacking the queen, developing this knight into the center. Queen to f4, bishop to b3. To try and threaten this mate here if this bishop moves out of the way. Queen to c1 check, king up to h2. Queen to f4 check. G3 could be played. Queen to g4. And recommendation is just king to g2 here. Queen to h3 check. King to g1. Queen back up to g4. What now? Knight to c5 attacking. Finally, the king runs. Although they're recommending we just go ahead and capture here. But if we do that, you have queen to h8. So this is just a lot of crazy stuff to be aware of. Queen can capture here. Now what? What if the rooks attack? Oh, and there's this move. We could just capture, then pick off the queen. So king up to d6. Oh my gosh. Yeah, anyway, it looks crazy. But let's get back to the game. I just went way off on a tangent there. Sorry about that. So h5 was played. This mistake move, retreating back. And now the rook captures, bishop captures, and knight to f5 is played. So a great move or the computer says this is a great move. Jumping up here towards the king side, threatening to jump up here to e7 and force the king into the corner. So queen move is played, although they want this move to attack white's queen. Now the queen repositions over here. So, there's a threat building here. If this knight jumps up, driving the king into the corner, and then the knight moves out of the way, there's a possible threat of delivering a mate here because this bishop is covering the h7 square. So here, Caruana I guess the pressure became too much and he makes a blunder. b5. So bishop to d7. Looks like that would be a better move. Protecting the knight with the rook. Attacking the knight here, but still the knight would jump forward, delivering check. King into the corner. And now, let's see, rook to e3, or even queen capturing on b7 here. So, why would this move be good? And the computer says that that is best. Well then, rook to e8, putting the pressure on this knight. And knight to f5. Because if the queen captures, the rook captures black's rook, and then the queen can capture here. So a lot of crazy stuff going on. Let's see. Recommendation is just moving over rook to b8. Then queen to e7. Capture. Rook captures, forking these two pieces. Bishop to e6. But now we have the knight jumping in and adding more pressure. King to g8 to help cover that. But we capture over here. Now rook to d8 and knight up to f5. So anyway, you get the picture. Let's wrap this up. I'll go back a few moves so we can see how this attack built up. All right, so the rooks double up here. The knight retreats back. Here protects the king a little bit. I guess it covers this square, so there aren't any surprises with the queen and bishop lining up here. So queen is under attack, a retreat. Nakamura gains space on the king side. Now we have a bishop retreat, which tries to open up this rook, maybe leave a little bit of, or relieve some of the attacking pressure by trading off rooks, which Nakamura jumps in here, taking a rook. The bishop captures. The knight jumps forward here, getting ready to jump up to e7. So the queen moves forward, but it looks like it would have been better to go to g5 and attack white's queen. The knight lines up on the knight over here, and the blunder. So the game continues with the knight delivering check, king into the corner, and now knight to d5. So Caruana resigns here. Why? Well, the best continuation looks to be c5, queen captures, and then the threat is the queen delivering a mate here. So, what could you do in this position? And the queen is under attack. So it's not looking good. It looks like the best thing you can do is play... Oh, wrong move. Sorry, that wasn't the right one. Let me reposition that, or re-input that. Delete that move. Knight to d7, attacking the queen. But you can just go ahead and capture. If your queen is captured, well then, now we have rook captures. Rook, knight captures, and this knight is under attack. You're just ahead a piece here. And an extra pawn. So knight to d7. or excuse me, that was e6. It wanted me to go up here to b7. But here you'd be attacking this pawn, but then it could just march forward, so that's not good. Clear that or delete that move. So what do they recommend? Knight up to d7. Bishop to d3, keeping an eye on these pawns. Now knight to b6, getting ready to jump down here maybe, but the bishop is covering that. So you get the idea. Pretty good game by Nakamura there. He had, 96% accuracy versus, let's take a look. Yeah, 96.3 versus 89.2 by Caruana. With that win, that helped put Nakamura, I believe he might be tied for second place at the moment, and games are ongoing today. So check that out. See what happens. I should have, made some videos earlier on this candidates tournament that's ongoing. So I'll probably do a few more videos before it ends. And, I'm anxious to see who is going to be the new challenger. Whoever wins this candidates tournament will challenge Ding Liren, who is the current world chess champion. And I believe that world championship match will take place later this year. So I look forward to seeing that. All right. Well, please like and subscribe for those that haven't already. Feel free to leave comments, suggestions, or any requests for future videos. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.